All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Let me begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsor for the month of Adar Bey's Leah Sol, for dedicating all the shir and drushos this month in honor of all of those who organized the beautiful, meaningful, and uplifting, groundbreaking ceremony. To thank our Week of Learning sponsor, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the shiurim this week in memory of Paul's grandmother, Dinah Bas Rav Dov Zichron Levrach. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the neshama will have an aliyah and the family in a chama. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, but a really tremendous daf ahead of us. Today's daf is Yud Daled, but we are starting on Yud Gimel Amud Beis. We're actually going to pick up, I say, right in the middle of Amud Beis, across from Tosfos Delo. If you see that Tosfos Delo Asi Eser Achos Isha, go right across in there. Beis Hillel. So let's remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit, because we're kind of picking up mid-sentence over here. The Mishnah recorded a fundamental machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. A Mishnah which actually reflects back to the previous Mishnah, where the Mishnah discussed the idea. We took it for granted that everyone holds that Saras Erva, the co-wife of an erva, is automatically disqualified for Yibum. And lo and behold, it turns out that this is a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That Beis Shammai ultimately holds that Saras Erva, the co-wife of an erva, is not disqualified from Yibum. And Abosai, by the way, when we say you're not disqualified from Yibum, what does that effectively mean? You have to do Yibum. Right? So in other words, she's obligated in Yibum, and failure to do Yibum is or when I say failure to do Yibum or Chalitza, is in and of itself an infraction. That's the position of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel, of course, again, their opinion is reflected in the previous Mishnah. So remember, Beis Shammai's entire approach is predicated on the drasha, Lo siya eshes hames hachutza leish zar. The way Beis Hillel understands it, let's just work backwards. The way Beis Hillel understands that is very simple. That ultimately, again, the wife of the deceased brother should not marry someone other than her brother-in-law. Chutza means someone outside of the family. Beis Shammai understands that hachutza is actually on the wife herself, not on the person who she's going to marry. And Beis Shammai understands that effectively there are two wives. There's an outer wife, a chutza wife, and if there's an outer wife, there must also be what? An inner wife, a closer wife. Who's the closer wife? Outer wife. So the inner closer wife, that refers to the erva wife, right? That refers to the woman who is an erva to one of the surviving brothers. Hachutza refers to a wife who is unrelated to anyone. And Beis Shammai says, you see from here that halacha l'maisa, when she is unrelated to anyone, halacha l'maisa, again, she is obligated in Yibum / Chalitza. Beis Shammai, miksiv lachutz, chutza ksiv. Beis Hillel, I'm picking up in the Gemara, Beis Hillel, Kevon dichsiv chutza. So ultimately, again, remember, the way Beis Hillel understands the word chutza is he understands it to the outside, not referring to the wife, but rather referring to the man who the wife may marry, or in this case, may not marry. She may not marry lochutz, to someone on the outside of the family. So the Gemara says over here, Beis Hillel, it says chutza, but when it says chutza, it's kiman dichsiv lachutz dami. We'll say the fact that it says chutza, it effectively is the same thing as had it said lachutz. Therefore, the Torah is telling me, when a woman is subject to Yibum, she may not marry someone on the outside. Now, it's actually very interesting. Now, I understand, but it says chutza, not lachutz. So this is very interesting. Beis Hillel holds that once it says chutza, it's as if it says lachutz. What does that mean? This Sanya, it's very interesting. This Sanya, Rabbi Nechemiah says, Kol teva shetzrich lamed b'tchila sehita lahakasav he b'sofa. Sometimes when a word required a lamed at the beginning, what the Torah just did is instead of putting a lamed at the beginning, it put a he at the end. Then I will say you're going to see effectively the meaning of the word is the same thing. For example, Tana de Ber Bishmal Kigon Elim. Elima. So let's say, for example, the Torah once tells the Jewish people to Elim. It could have said Le'elim. Instead, what does it say? Elima. It's the same thing. Biblically, it's the same. To Elim. Machanaim, Machanaima. Right? We're going to because it said Limachanaim, Machanaima. Mitzrayim, Mitzrayima. Divlasaima, Yerushalayima, Midbara. So therefore, also, it's actually very interesting. So Beis Shammai says, Beis Hillel holds that halacha l'maisa, when the Torah wants to tell you about a going somewhere to a place, it has one of two ways of writing it. Either a lamed at the beginning or a he at the end. Effectively, they're the same thing. So therefore, according to Beis Hillel, when the Torah says chutza, right? Chutza, so that's effectively the same thing as writing what? Lachutz. Now, I both say, had it written lachutz, everybody would agree that what does it mean? She may not marry a man outside of the family, i.e., if she is subject to yibum, she may not marry someone who's not one of the surviving brothers. So Beis Hillel says the fact that it writes it chutza instead of lachutz doesn't make any difference. The meaning is, I will say, I saw something very beautiful. I think I printed it. The Beis Yisrael, the Ger Rebbe, says something very beautiful. The Ger Rebbe quotes from the Kotzker. He says, I don't understand. If lachutz and chutza are the same thing, then why not just say lachutz? See, the whole machlokes over here is how to define the word chutza. Is chutza a reference to her not marrying on the outside? Or is chutza actually a reference to who the wife is? And the ambiguity is only there because it said chutza. Why not just say lachutz? Especially according to Beis Hillel, where we just saw that halacha l'maisa, chutza and lachutz are the same thing. And the Beis Yisrael of Gorder, the Ger Rebbe, says something so beautiful. He says, listen to this. He says, "Shekol teva shetzia v'chi ma revach yesh bazeh." Elamikan, listen to this. Well, so what do you gain? What do you gain by chutza instead of lishtok? What do you gain by chutza instead of lochutz? So the Rebbe says, Mikan she'im berega ze efshar lishtok afilu ben ko uben ko titzarich achar kach lahagir es hadavar harei ze revach b'fnei atzmo. Well, it says the Rebbe something so amazing. The ability not to have to talk. The ability not to have to say something is in and of itself a major accomplishment. See, we often think about that the ability to articulate or express some idea as the highest use of dibur, the highest use of speech. Sometimes when we learn this through life experience, the highest form of speech is not to talk at all. Is to know ultimately when to hold your tongue. To know that sometimes the most effective things could often be communicated through silence. And sometimes, again, that which I say actually doesn't need to be said. So says the Beis Yisrael, the Ger Rebbe, Torah is teaching us an incredible lesson. It could have said lachutz. Instead, what does it do? It saves the lamed. It doesn't say anything now. To teach us that sometimes the highest accomplishment of your dibur is to not use it at all. But 1 second you'll say, but it's putting the hay on the back end anyway. So the Ger Rebbe says, sometimes even if you know you're going to have to talk, the ability not to have to talk right now is in and of itself an accomplishment as well. I might have to say what I have to say, right? I might have to go and articulate, but sometimes the ability to remain in a state of silence, even though the deeper might have to come now. So I'm not saying the lamed, but I'm going to have to put on the hay later on. That in and of itself is an accomplishment. I will say, such an incredible, so this was a katzker vart, right? There's a little bit of a sharper idea, but a very profound yesod. Especially in the time that we live, where again, instant communication is so easy, and we know because it's so easy, often again, it leads to so much unnecessary speech, unfortunately, inappropriate speech, hurtful speech, all these kinds of things we've lost a certain sensitivity to the power of speech. So the Katzker says, the Kadosh Baruch Hu reminds us, sometimes it's not what you say that makes all the difference, but sometimes it's the ability to say nothing at all that is the highest form of accomplishment, even though I know I may have to say it later on. The ability sometimes to hold my tongue, to control my dibur right in this moment is in and of itself an accomplishment. Incredible. Beis Shammai, Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Minahu. So let's say, where does Beis Shammai learn this position of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav? Remember again, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav that halacha l'maisa, if a woman subject to Yibum tries to have Kiddushin, right, with another man, the Kiddushin doesn't work. The Kiddushin simply is ineffective. So where does Beis Shammai learn this from? So the Gemara says, Mila ish zar nafka. They learn that from the phrase, Ish zar. Good. Beis Hillel, according to Beis Hillel, why does he also learn that from Ish zar? Inachinami, chutzalam. So if that's the case, if Beis Hillel learns that she can't have Kiddushin with a man who's not the Yavam, and he learns it from Ish zar, then what does he need chutza from? To which the Gemara says, L'rabo sa'arusa. This is very interesting. It will say, what happens, let's say a simple case, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, right? Reuven does Kiddushin with Rachel. Again, no erva case over here, just a simple, straight-out case, right? Reuven does Erisin with Rachel. Now remember, Erisin is the initial stage of marriage, betrothal, where man gives a woman an item of value, but they are not living together as husband and wife. Let's say now Reuven dies, obviously without children. They haven't lived together, or Reuven has no other children. Right? So what happens now? Is there a Yibum obligation on an Arusa wife? And Beis Hillel says yes. Beis Hillel says yes. And actually, interestingly enough, he learns that out from Chutza. And he understands in this case, Chutza does refer to the woman, even if she's a little bit outside of her husband. What does he say outside of her husband? She's not living with him. Again, we'll talk about this sugya. She's not living with him. Even if all there was Erisin, halach l'maisa is still an obligation of Yibum. The idach, Beis Shammai will say hachutza. He learns it out from hachutza instead of just saying chutza. The idach, Beis Hillel, chutza mashu. He doesn't darshan the hey hachutza versus chutza. Good. So we'll say. So remember again, this is all trying to understand the position of Beis Shammai. Rava Amar Tamar de Beis Shammai. Rava says no, you have it wrong. The reason of Beis Shammai is for a totally different idea, which is de'ein iser Chal al Isser. You both say this is fascinating. The reason Beis Shammai allows, and when we say allowed, it's not allowed, obligates a tsaras erva in Yibum is because one prohibition cannot devolve on top of an already existing prohibition. Now take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Ein Isser, Eshes Ach, Chal al Bito Shal Zeh, Itzel Aviha. Hilchach, Lo ramya kameli abume, bahave kiman delese. So we'll say, let's just illustrate this in a very simple way. If you use the chart, not the chart from yesterday, but the chart of day one chart. Right? So remember again, we've got three brothers. This chart over here, we've got three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Right? Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. Remember, Rachel is Shimon's daughter. Rachel is Shimon's daughter. So we'll say, so now what happens when Reuven marries Rachel? Let's assume he's already, right? He marries Rachel. So we'll say, there's already, Shimon already has an Isser towards Rachel. What's the Isser? It's his daughter. So Rava suggests the following. Now we'll say, up until now what we were saying was, so therefore because Shimon can't do Yibum with Rachel, that same status, that inability to even spreads to the co-wife to Leah. Beis Shammai says like this, here's the issue. Because Rachel is already usher to Shimon, Ein Isser Chalal Isser. Once you have an already existing prohibition, that blocks any additional prohibitions from devolving upon that same prohibited entity. So because Rachel is already usher to Shimon because she's his daughter, she never takes on the status of what? Eshes Ach. Eshes Ach, brother's wife. She never takes it on. Why does she never take it on? Why not? Why? Like, what does it do? So ultimately, also it's fascinating. So because Rachel never takes upon herself Eshes Ach, she never precludes her co-wife from Yibum. So we'll say, in Beis Shammai's logic is like this. The only way to go ahead and prohibit someone, right, a co-wife from engaging in Yibum is how it would appear according to Beis Shammai, is if you yourself are included in Yibum. So if you're included in Yibum and disqualified, then the marital bond will allow you to spread your disqualification to your co-wife. But Lamaisa, if you were never disqualified, in other words, according to Beis Shammai, Rachel is never in the parsha of Yibum. She never enters into the framework. Nothing to do with her, because she's already prohibited to Shimon because she's Shimon's daughter. So because Ein Isser Chalal Isser, she's never in the parsha. Because she's never in the parsha, therefore what? She never disqualifies her co-wife, which is really an incredible yisod. Now Rashi goes on and says, V'chein va'achos isha. The same applies with, again, in the case of if they married sisters, or b'kulan v'achim mefarshim also the Rabbi Silber says, let's go on a little bit. So now says the Gemara. So says the Gemara, Tenach, heicha dinasa meis, v'achrakach nasa chai. So we'll say, the Gemara now transitions to talking about a case of sisters, where let's say again, Reuven and Shimon were married to sisters, in which case again we have two prohibitions. One of achos ishto, wife's sister, and the second one of achos ishta, of eshes ach. So says the Gemara, listen to this. So Tenach, this makes sense. Where let's say Reuven, the deceased brother, first got married, and then afterwards again Shimon, the surviving brother, marries his wife. Then lo asi iser eshes achos isha v'chayil iser eshes ach. Then I will say, in that case, again, we would say that ultimately, again, the prohibition of achos isha would not devolve upon the already existing prohibition of eshes ach. El nasa chay ve'achakach nasa meis. But I will say, in the case where, let's say, again, Shimon first married his wife, and then afterwards, again, Reuven married his wife, achos isha kadim. Ultimately, again, the prohibition of achos isha would be first, and the tzara should be asura. Kevan de lo asi iser eshesach v'chayala iser achos isha havide tzaras erva shlo b'makom mitzvah. To which Rava would say, according to Beis Shammai, since ultimately again the iser of eshesach cannot devolve upon achos isha, essentially the co-wife becomes like a co-wife shlo b'makom mitzvah. And I will say, if there's one thing we've established is, anytime you say a co-wife is prohibited, a co-wife is only prohibited in what situation? Shelo b'makom mitzvah, in a yibum context. But outside of a yibum context, ultimately, again, she is permitted. So therefore, also what comes out is according to Beis Shammai. Remember, so here's what let's review the facts. Beis Shammai holds that Tzaras Erva is chayeves in yibum. And essentially now we have two different possibilities as to why that is. Possibility one, which was of Shimon ben Pazi, his idea was, Beis Shammai darshans the pasuk, Lo siya eshes hameis hachutza li'ish zar. Hachutza, his understanding, refers to not a man outside of the marriage, but who? One of the women, of one of the wives of the deceased husband. There's an inner wife and an outer wife. The inner wife is the erva wife, the outer wife is the totally unrelated wife, and yet the Torah tells us that the unrelated wife who is a tzaras erva still does yibum. Second approach, Rava, ein iser chalal iser. Good. I'll say two svaras as to Beis Shammai's opinion. Let's go weiter. So it says the Gemara Chaltzu Beis Shammai poslim. So we'll say, remember again, in these cases of a tzaras erva, so Beis Shammai says if the tzara, so I'll say, so just by the way, just to be clear, going back to our table again, first table in the Masechta, the wife who is the point of contention in all of this is Leah, right? Leah is the machlokes wife. Because remember again, everyone is agreeing, Rachel is an erva, so obviously she's not subject to yibum at all. The machlokes is Leah. Beis Hillel is going to say Leah is exempt from yibum because she is a tzaras erva. Beis Shammai is going to say Leah is chayeves in yibum slash chalitza, because your tzaras erva is chayeves. Good. So therefore Beis Shammai says, Mishnah said, according to Beis Shammai, if Leah does yibum, she's psula. Now we'll discuss this. A woman who undergoes chalitza effectively is treated like a grusha, like a divorcee. Therefore, she cannot marry a Kohen. So pshita, that's obvious, says the Gemara. La'fugid Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, the Amar bo nesakin le'mutzaros shuchotzos v'lo misyakmos. Kamashon Beis Hillel machshir. Bosi, listen to this. This is to exclude the position of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Bosi, listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that in general, whenever you have a machlokes, when in doubt, do chalitza. It's a good mantra, right? When in doubt, do chalitza. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's logic is, just do chalitza and you just satisfy all of the opinions. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri would say, Leah, listen, Leah, you're subject to machlokes. Beis Shammai says, you're chayiv in yibum. Beis Hillel says, you're totally exempt. Just do chalitza. Kamash Malan, Beis Hillel says, no, we don't want, it's not an answer, just do chalitza, Arabosai, because when a woman does chalitza, that changes her marital status. So Beis Shammai says Leah is not subject at all to the yibum framework. So we're not going to have her do chalitza. Good. Nisyamu Beis Hillel Postlin. Supposed to listen to this. If now, remember, if Leah did Yibum, so ultimately again, Beis Hillel would say she's psula. Now both say. Now remember again, according to Hillel, if Leah does Yibum, what is that? That's an Isser Erva. Because according to Beis Hillel, Leah has the status of Ishes Ach, a brother's wife, and she is not subject to Yibum at all. And if she does so, ultimately again, she is psula. And if she has children, they're mamzerim. So says the Gemara, let's go, Hasulamali, I did the Tanachal Taninami Yisam. Truth, you don't really need this case, but once you mentioned Chalitza, also mentioned Yibum. We both say, get ready for this. Stinan Hasam. We both say we learned. Megillah Nikres. How incredible is this? Just a few days after Purim, the Gemara is quoting Megillah in the middle of Yevamos. Megillah Nikres. I will say this is an incredible sugya. Megillah Nikres ba'achad asar, b'shteim asar, b'shlosh asar, ba'abar asar, b'chamisha asar, lo pakos v'lo yosar. Both the Megillah can be read on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, no earlier than the 11th, no later than the 15th. The Gemara says, Amar li Reish Lakish Rav Yochanan, Ikri kan, lo tiskodedu, lo sasu agudos. To which of us listen to this? The Gemara asks, right, Reish Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan, I don't understand why this is possible. Why are you permitted to read the Megillah on all of these different dates? Doesn't the Torah say lo tiskodedu? Lo tiskodedu, Rabbi say means what? Do not go ahead and make groups. That there should be one Torah. You can't make it look like Klal Yisrael has multiple Torahs. So how could it be that you're going to read the Megillah on all of these dates? Does this not create groups, right? Different cohorts within Yiddishkeit. The problem is not the groupings. In other words, the problem is that it looks like kishtei Toros. It looks like there's two different Torahs. So Gemara says 1 second. First of all, so he answered. Rabbi Yochanan answered. The pasuk lo tiskodedu is actually there to teach us a halacha. We'll say, what does lo tiskodedu mean? You can't cut yourself as a display of mourning for the dead. That's what the pasuk means. Imkein lemakro lo tigodedu. My tiskodedu. If that's the case, just write tigodedu. Why do you write it in an elongated form tiskodedu? Shma mina lahachi hu da'asa. Ultimately, again, to teach us, that is coming to teach us this halacha, lo sasu agudos. Do not engage in factional Judaism. Do not become different independent groups and make it look like there are different Torahs. Maybe that's what the whole pasuk is coming to teach me. Lo tagodu. My lo tiskodedu, shma min atarti. So the fact that it wrote the elongated form teaches me two things. Number one, there's a pashut pshat. Pashut pshat, I will say, is that when God forbid a person loses a loved one, they cannot go ahead and harm themselves as a display of mourning. I cannot cut myself as a display of mourning. That's halacha number one. Halacha number two, lo sasu agudos. Do not go ahead and make groups. Right? Do not engage in factional Judaism. Number one, because it fundamentally erodes achdus. Number two, because it looks like there's more than one Torah for Klal Yisrael. Now watch this. Amalei ad kan lo shanis. And I say, why are you asking the question from here? Didn't you learn the Mishnah? Makom shenagu lasos malacha va'arei psachim ad chatzos osin. Makom shenagu shlo lasos ein osin. There's a Mishnah. Malacha and Erev Pesach. But isn't this incredible? One Gemara. We got both Purim and Pesach. And Mamish were right in the middle of these two Yomim Tovim. Incredible. Mishnah says, where there's a minhag not to do Malacha on Erev Pesach, you shouldn't. But if you don't have that minhag, you can. Isn't this a problem of factional Judaism? Everybody's doing something different. Amrli Amina Lachan Surah Tanasham Bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan the Kaimei Purim Bizmanihem Zmanim Harbi Tiknulam Chachamim Va'at Amrit Min Haga. Well, how are you comparing it? I'm telling you about a halacha. Right? Well, so when it comes to Mikra Megillah, Chazal instituted, if you live in an unwalled city, you must read on the 14th, you can't read on the 15th, and vice versa. And you're bringing up a minhag of Malacha and Erev Pesach, V'hasam Lavi Surah Havya, but are you telling me that by Malacha and Erev Pesach there's no Isser? V'atnan, Beis Shammai Osrin, or Beis Hillel Matirin, but I said the Lashon over there is Beis Hillel says that it's mutter to do Malacha and Erev Pesach, and Beis Shammai says that it's Aser. Amar Le'er say here's the issue. By Malacha and Erev Pesach, there's no problem of agudos. There's no problem of factionalism. Why? Listen to this. Haroa omer melochahu delesle. So also listen to this. Because if somebody sees you not doing melacha on Erev Pesach, what does it look like? What does it look like? You've got no work, right? In other words, it does. I'm saying the issue of lo sasu agudos is only when it's clear that people are actively engaging in different practices. But if, let's say, again, one group is doing work, one group is not doing work, on any given day, there are people who aren't working. So if I'm not doing work Erev Pesach, all it looks like is that I don't have work. It doesn't look like factional Judaism. If we are indeed concerned about of factional Judaism and making it look like we have two Torahs, what about our Mishnah over here? Beis Shammai says that Saras Erva ultimately again is Chayiv in Yibum, and Beis Hillel says they are Aser. Isn't that a problem? Top of Yudalid, I will say, watch this. Mis Savris Asu Beis Shammai Kidivreim, Lo Asu Beis Shammai Kidivreim. I will say, so watch this. So remember again, the Gemara responds, 1 second. You think that Beis Shammai actually followed their opinion? No, they never followed their opinion, right? In other words, they espoused the opinion, but they never actually followed it. I will say, isn't this absolutely incredible? So therefore, there's no problem of agudos. There's no problem of factionalism over here. There's no problem of two Torahs, because although Beis Shammai articulated this approach, they never actually accepted it, and they never practiced it. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asu va'asu. Rabbi Yochanan says, incorrect, Reish Lakish. Beis Shammai absolutely followed their opinion. Rabbi said, now get ready for this. This is incredible. Ubeplukta the Rav Shmuel. The Rav Amar lo Asu Beis Shammai kidevreim, u'Shmuel Amar Asu v'asu. Rabbi said, listen to this, because there's a general machlokas. When Beis Shammai espoused their opinion, did they follow their opinion, or did they yield to Beis Hillel? And Rabbi said, this is indeed subject to fundamental machlokes. Rav says, Beis Shammai never really followed their stated opinion, and Shmuel says they did. So Gemara says, 1 second. Amos. At what point in history are we talking about? Ilei makodim baskol. If it's before the baskol, then I will say, what baskol? Take a look, tap Rashi, Yadalad Abadalif. Right, what baskol? Be'erevin, Parakamon, Yotza, baskol va'amra halacha kabeis Hillel. Remember again, we saw this Gemara, the baskol that came out and said, Eilu v'eilu divrei Elokim chayim. Both the words of Beis Hillel and the words of Beis Shammai are the words of the eternal God. But halacha kabeis Hillel. Right? So you're both great. Right? You're both great. Eilu v'eilu, but halacha kabeis Hillel. So the Gemara says, if we're talking about before the baskol, my time in the mandamar lo asu, then what's the logic? What's the logic of Rav? One other, if it's before the baskol, then why would Beis Shammai not have followed their opinion? If it's after the baskol, my time in the mandamar asu, then ultimately again, why would Beis Shammai follow their opinion? To which the Gemara says, okay, let's analyze. Let's say, by the way, take a little bit of a deep breath with this Gemara, right? It's, this is the, right? There's no charts. There's no like illicit unions or relationships over here. We're just gonna have, it's just nice. It's just nice. We're just gonna learn some Gemara for a little bit. So here we go. So the Gemara says, I feel like everybody's tense, waiting for the next crazy Yibum situation to drop. You're safe. You're in a safe space. For the next block and a half, we're good. Says the Gemara, Ibai Sema Kodim Baskol, Ibai Sema Leachar Baskol. So we'll say you can frame the answer one of two ways. Listen to this. Ibai Sema Kodim Baskol. So we'll say it could be that the way to frame it ultimately again is before the Baskol. So we'll say if it's before the Baskol, then ultimately again, why would Beis Shammai not have followed on their opinion? Ukigon to Beis Hillel Ruba. We'll say it could have been a situation where Beis Hillel was the rov. And I will say, and remember again, how is halacha decided? Achari Rabim Lahatos. Halacha is decided by the majority. So it could have been that it was before the Baskol, but nevertheless, Beis Shammai did not follow their ruling because they were not the majority. To which the Gemara says, L'man damar lo asu, according to the opinion, they did not practice their own approach to Beis Hillel Ruba. Uman damar asu, Kiyaz linan basa ruba hecha dechiyad dadininu. I'll say the other opinion will say, when do you follow the rov? You follow the rov when everyone is equal. Hacha Beis Shammai mechadedi tfei. But Rabbi say, but Beis Shammai was always sharper than Beis Hillel. So before the Bas Kol, even if Beis Hillel was the rov, Beis Shammai would still practice their own approach because again, they had greater proficiency in halacha. Very interesting. The other possibility is, even after the Baskol, so the opinion said that Beis Shammai did not practice their approach because the Baskol came out and said, the halacha follows Beis Hillel. Oman da'amar asu, Rabbi Yeshua hi da'amar ein mashgichin bebaskol. And the opinion that said that they continue to practice their approach, who is that? That's Rabbi Yeshua, who says, we don't pay attention to Baskols. Baskols are beautiful. They're wonderful. But Allah has decided not by voices that come out from the heavens, but rather, again, by the adjudication and process that unfolds in the Beis Medrash. Uman da'amar ka'asus. Now let's go back. See, here's what we know. It appears that at least at some point in time, Beis Shammai followed their own rulings. So before Bas Kol, after Bas Kol, that's what it sounds like, at least according to some opinion. How were they able to do that? After all, Karina and Kalotis go to do Lo Sasu Agudos. I will say, isn't there a problem of factional Judaism? So if you, I will say, by the way, I think many of us have wondered this because right, we're always familiar with Machlokes Yesham Beis Hillel, and the way I always envisioned it in my mind, which I'm sure you also did, which is there were periods of history where Beis Shammai was doing X and Beis Hillel was doing Y. Right? And doesn't that sound so strange? In other words, we're used to having different opinions in halacha, but it's kind of all under a general framework. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and I will say, by the way, here's a perfect example, right? This Yevamos situation in our Mishnah. You've got Beis Shammai doing one thing, Beis Hillel doing something different. To which the Gemara says, isn't that a problem of lo tiskodadu, of lo sasu agudos, factional Judaism? And doesn't it look like then that there are effectively two Torahs? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi, ki amrina tiskodadu gegon shnei batei din bir achos, halalu morim k'divrei Beis Shammai, halalu morim k'divrei Beis Hillel. Aval shtei batei dinim b'shtei ayaros laslan ba. We'll say, what do we say lo tiskodadu? If you have two Beis Dins in one town, and one Beis Din says, go like Beis Shammai, one Beis Din says, go like Beis Hillel, that's factionalism. But if you have two different batei din in two different cities, that's fine. And effectively, Beis Shammai is like two different cities. Amrli Rava. But that's not true. But Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel often lived in the same place, right? Their schools, their students lived in the same place. So is that not like having two batei din in one city, each delivering, or each adjudicating based on a different system? Allah Amarava, Kiamina Lotis go to do Kigon Beis Din Be'ir Achos, Plag Morin K'divrei Beis Shammai, Uplag Morin K'divrei Beis Hillel. Aval Shtei Batei Din Be'ir Achos, Leslan Ba. We'll say, when is there a problem of Lotis go to do? If you have one Beis Din, and part of the Beis Din Paskin is like Beis Hillel, and part of the Beis Din Paskin is like Beis Shammai, ultimately, again, that's Lotis go to do. But if you have two separate Batei Din, and one Paskin is like Beis Hillel, and one Paskin is like Beis Shammai, ultimately, again, that's not a problem of factional Judaism. So I'll say, so it's very interesting. So apparently, again, see, what the Gemara accepts is that Lotis go to do does not require unanimity. That's what's interesting. It doesn't require unanimity. But what the concern is that, so therefore there's always room for differences of opinion. The shaila just is, when do the differences of opinion kind of create the appearance of just two different types of Judaism? So the Gemara seems to say, as long as it's clear, like there's two different structures, so to speak. There's a Beis Din of Beis Shammai, there's a Beis Din of Beis Hillel, but people understand that these two batei din are under the same umbrella of Torah. There's just a different interpretation that each is having, but it's one Torah. That's acceptable. That's acceptable. It seems to me what the Gemara is uncomfortable with is when you have one Beis Din, and in that Beis Din, they're unable to get together to espouse halacha. So in that one Beis Din, you've got one group saying this, one group saying that. That's factionalism. That's factionalism. But ultimately, again, when we can accept that there are different types of groups interpreting things in different ways, but all under the same umbrella of Torah, that's not a problem of lotus go do. Very interesting. Tashma, was very interesting. So just some other examples of where people engaged in different practices in the same city. So for example, in the city of, in the place of Rabbi Eliezer, they would cut down wood in order to make coals to fashion a knife for bris milah on Shabbos. So let's remember again, you're allowed to give bris milah on Shabbos, right? You're mitzvah to give bris milah on Shabbos if it's bismano, right? Now remember, the interesting, Rabbi Eliezer says, not only can you give the bris, but what? Hechsha mitzvah. Anything you need in order to facilitate the bris. I need a knife to give a bris. I don't have a knife. You could go ahead and cut down trees to make a fire, to go ahead and forge metal, to go ahead and make a knife for bris milah. That's right. Rabbi Yosef leads to the Gemara says, now remember, the Rabbanon disagree with that, and the Rabbanon say that Allah Chalamai says only the milah itself that's docha Shabbos, but machshirei mitzvah are not docha Shabbos. Similarly, b'mkomosh Rabbi Yosef Lili, hayu ochlim basar of b'chalav. In the place of Rabbi Yosef Lili, they would eat chicken and milk, because they felt that the Isser is only basa b'chalav, right? Lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imo. Only an animal which produces milk is there a problem of basa b'chalav, meat and milk. Fowl does not produce milk, therefore there's no problem to eat chicken and milk together. Because we'll say, by the way, we paskin, we include chicken in the prohibition together with meat and milk. That's because we're confused that people are going to get confused between chicken and meat, because they're often grouped together. But Lamaisa, Rabbi Yosef Lidi is really technically correct. First wide line. So what do you see from here? Bimkomosh Rabbi Eliezer in, Bimkomosh Rabbi Akiva lo, Disanya, Klal Am Rabbi Akiva, Komolach Hashem Shalasos Merev Shabbos, Ein Ladoch Es HaShabbos. So the Gemara will say, so you see over here that Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Akiva felt that any malacha for bris milah that could be done before Shabbos, i.e. the making of the knife, you have no license to do on Shabbos itself. The only license on Shabbos is for bris milah. So I will say, isn't this a problem of lo tisko to do? Once again, you see different people doing different things. To which the Gemara says, "V'hai ma'iti yufta mekomos shiny." Gemara says, "One second, it's not a problem. What did you just say before?" We'll say, if you're in different cities doing different things, that's not a problem of factional Judaism. It appears the only problem of factional Judaism is when you're in the same city, and it sounds like what? Like on the same Beis Din, unable to reach any level of consensus, and each group on the Beis Din espousing their own ideas. But if you're in different cities, we'll say, what's incredible is the Gemara accepts that Yiddishkeit allows for a spectrum of opinions. It allows for a spectrum of interpretations. Now, to be clear, again, it's not an unlimited spectrum, right? The spectrum must be embedded in a framework of normative halacha, of normative hashkafa, of normative interpretation that's based on a system, but it allows for a spectrum. So the only issue we're concerned is for factionalism. So the Gemara says, different cities, not a problem. So why does the person bring this up all to begin with? I might have thought that because Shabbos is so chomer, maybe this has the appearance, or maybe this should be treated as all happening in one city. Kamashmalon, no. Good. Tashma. Rabbi Avo ki ikvel la'asi Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Both listen to this. Rabbi Avo, when he went to the city of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, hava metaltel shraga. He would carry a lantern. Now, I will say there's a whole machlokes about aner and muktzah. Aner and muktzah. See, he would go ahead and carry a shrug when the Gemara talks about a candle. What they're really referring to is not like a candle like you're thinking about it, but like a little oil lamp, right? So it's an earthenware thing that has a base keyboard, receptacle, and a little lip on the right there, which you place the wick. That's called the ner. So ultimately, again, when Rabbi Avo went to the city of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he would carry the ner. And went to Rabbi Yochanan, he wouldn't carry it. So also, so the idea was that wherever Rabbi Avo went, he was deferential to the Rav of the city and their opinion on muktzah. What's the problem over here? At the end of the day, again, it was different cities. In different cities, they do different things. Anan haki kaminan. Rabbi Avo Hechi avid hacha hachi, vehechi avid hacha hachi. Rabbi say over here the shayla is on Rabbi Avo himself. Rabbi Avo, what do you hold? How is it that on one city you're holding the candle, another city you're not holding the candle? What about your own personal practices? In other words, isn't that contradictory? Rabbi Avo Rabbi Shimon Levi Sirle. Rabbi Avo held like Rabbi Shimon Levi. V'chi mikla la'asher Rabbi Yochanan v'chavim metaltal mishum kvod Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Avo himself held that you're allowed to carry a ner on Shabbos. It was just when he went to the city on Rabbi Yochanan, he was deferential to Rabbi Yochanan. So we'll say, but isn't it confusing for Rabbi Avo's attendant? Right? Rabbi Avo's attendant is going to see his master doing different things. Rabbi Avo told his attendant what was going on and explained it to him. Beautiful. Tashma avabi she'elu osrim ve'elu matirim lo nimnu be'shamay. So therefore again, we're still kind of in the, remember, why is this all happening? This is all happening. The Gemara launched into a discussion about lo tiskodadu, not engaging in factional practices, because our Mishnah seems to sound like Beis and Beis Hillel as two different practices. So we'll say this led to a discussion. Did Beis Shammai ever follow their own teachings or not? Right? We know that they argue, but Lemaisa, did they follow their own teachings? To which that in and of itself is a machlokes. So watch, here we go. So Tashma, Ava B'She'elu Osrim Ve'elu Matirim Lo Nimnu Beis Shammai Milisa Nashim Meisilo V'Lo Beis Beis Shammai. They will say even though Beis Shammai still disagreed, he's going back to the case in the Mishnah of Tsaras Erva, and Beis Shammai said Tsaras Erva is obligated in Yibum, and Beis Hillel said she is fundamentally exempt. Nevertheless, they did not abstain from marrying into each other's families. I amrit b'shtala lo asu mishum hachi lo nimnu. Eli amrit asu amai lo nimnu. So we'll say, if you tell me that Beis Shammai never really followed their rulings, I understand why Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel intermarried. But if Beis Shammai did follow their rulings, then how is intermarriage between these two groups possible? After all, so we'll say Beis Shammai can marry into Beis Hillel, because we'll say, remember again, according to Beis Shammai, what is Beis Hillel doing? Beis Hillel is allowing a woman, remember again I will say, this is back to our chart. Beis Hillel is allowing Leah, the co-wife of the Erva. Beis Hillel is allowing her to marry who? Anyone she wants. Right? Someone outside. So we'll say, according to Beis Shammai, worst case scenario is that is a lav. She's a lav. She's committing a lav, right? Because remember, Beis Shammai holds that Leah is obligated in Yibum. Beis Hillel is saying she's not obligated in anything, so she's allowed to marry whoever she wants. So she marries whoever she wants. It's a lav. It's a lav. So I understand why Beis Shammai would be comfortable marrying into the families of Beis Hillel. It's only a lav. But I will say, on the flip side, according to Beis Hillel, if Leah does Yibum, Leah has what? Committed an Isser Erva, and those children will be Mamzerim. So how is Beis Hillel marrying into Beis Shammai? To which the Gemara says, Ela Beis Hillel Beis Shammai amai lo nimnu, b'nei chavi krisos mamzerim nimnu. V'chi tema kasav Beis Hillel dein mamzer mechai bekrisos. Well, maybe you'll say that according to Beis Hillel, maybe they're not mamzerim. Maybe a mamzer doesn't come from a chi of kares. Maybe a mamzer only comes from more illicit unions. It's not true. Everybody agrees that a mamzer comes from a relationship that's an erva and punishable by kares. Rather, I will say it must be from the fact that what? From the fact that Beis Hillel is marrying into the families of Beis Shammai. It must be that what? Beis Shammai never practiced what they preached. Right? In other words, they did not follow their own piskei halacha. They espoused their halachic opinion, but ultimately, again, they actually never practiced it. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, maybe not. Li'olam asu." Could be that very well that Beis Shammai did practice what they preached. Demodi lehu uparshi. We'll say it's possible that when we say, like we saw some Rashi in the Mishnah, that when the Mishnah says that Beis Hillel married into the families of Beis Shammai, they married into which families? All families except for these kind of situations. That Beis Shammai would tell Beis Hillel, listen, you probably do, you would not want to marry these families because according to you, these families are highly problematic, a potential issue of mamzerus. So again, Beis Shammai would tell Beis Hillel which families were problematic according to Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel would not marry those families but they would marry every other family from Beis Shammai. This appears to be clear. Diktani Seifa, because we also look at the end of the Mishnah. What was the end of the Mishnah? Kol hataros v'chol hatmeo shayu asher elu mitar ve'elu mitamin lo nimnu osei taros elu agabe elu. Let's remember again, there are machlokes in Tumah and Tara by Beis Shammai Sil. Yet despite the fact that they had machlokes in Tumah and Tara, they would use each other's utensils. So now watch this, I will say. Now watch this. Amud Beis. See, if you tell me that at the end of the day, that halacha l'maisa, Beis Shammai would tell Beis Hillel, because in this case also, Beis Hillel was more machmir with certain situations of Tumah and Tara over Beis Shammai. If Beis Shammai would tell Beis Hillel which utensils were problematic, mishum hachi lo nimnu, then ultimately again, Beis Hillel would just would borrow the other types of utensils, but would avoid borrowing the kinds of utensils that would be problematic according to his positions. But if ultimately again they did not tell them, so I understand why Beis Shammai would borrow from Beis Hillel, because ultimately again Beis Hillel was more machmir. So Beis Shammai would never have a problem borrowing utensils from Beis Hillel. Ela Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai lama lo nimnu, taros de Beis Shammai le Beis Hillel tameos ninu. But I will say, how could it be that Beis Hillel would just borrow from Beis Shammai? According to Beis Shammai, according to Beis Shammai, certain things that they rendered tahar, Beis Hillel would render tameh. Elalav demodi lohu shmamina. Rather, it must be that what? It must be that Beis Shammai would alert Beis Hillel to certain halachic realities. Therefore, I will say, it's actually quite beautiful. So it turns out the Gemara says, according to this approach, Beis Shammai did act on their halachic rulings. They didn't just espouse ideas, they actually followed these ideas. They practiced these ideas. I said, if that's the case, how did the families intermarry? So in the cases of Yibum, Beis Shammai would tell Beis Hillel, these are the families that you don't want to marry into. Right? They're wonderful people, great people, but for you, these families represent certain halachic issues. So you don't want to marry these families. The Gemara says the proof to that is, they borrowed utensils from each other. How could they borrow utensils from each other? How is that possible? Beis Hillel was more machmir than Beis Shammai in certain situations of tumah, which means that according to Beis Hillel, certain utensils that Beis Shammai considered to be tahar, were really tameh. What's the answer? Beis Shammai would tell them, the modilu. It's very simple. Very simple. Just tell them, by the way, you don't want to borrow these utensils, right? These utensils are not good for you, not a good fit for you. And that's it. So they told them what the problematic areas were, both by marriage as well as by utensils. And halacha l'maisa, Beis Hillel would avoid those things and ultimately marry the rest of the families, use the rest of the utensils. We'll say, what an incredible yisod. You see, when it comes to other Jews, the klal gadol is, there's always more that we agree upon than what we disagree upon. So it's true, the Gemara says, let's be clear, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel did not see eye to eye with a number of things. So let's identify the areas that we don't see eye to eye on, right? So we've got Yibum, Saras Erva of Yibum, and Tumah and Tara, or certain areas of Tumah and Tara. Good. Now that we know, and you understand again, we could intermarry, so I'm using that word, right? We could intermarry, right? We could borrow from each other. We know there are certain things that I can't do, certain things that I won't do, and that's okay. See, I will say, sometimes the klal gadol and achdos is knowing when you could cross, what's lashon? When you could cross the aisle and when you can't. Right? It's incredibly important to know that, and incredibly important to articulate that. And that's how achdos has to happen. We can have achdos with all kinds of Jews, as long as we're explicitly clear. There are certain things I'm gonna do, and there are certain things that I'm not gonna do. And I'm going to articulate that from the outset. So it's clear what are the lines, what are not the lines. And once we know that, there's so much more we could collaborate on. There's so much more we could do together. There's so many ways in which we could coexist. There's so much achdus to be had, as long as we're all explicitly clear as to what lines cannot be crossed. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Umay Umay Dahach Mehach. So I'll say it's interesting. The way the Mishnah is kind of proving this point, fascinatingly enough, the way the Mishnah is proving the point is halacha l'maaseh by bringing the raya from kalim, from utensils, right? As if to say that utensils is the stronger proof to the Yibum case, to which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. See, you might have thought like this. See, the case of the Tsaras Erva is not such a big deal. The truth, why not? Because Yibum has a kol, right? People know about it. So Beis Hillel would know which families to avoid. Kamash Malon, Rabbi say that even in the Yibum cases, Beis Shammai would actively alert Beis Hillel to which families would be problematic for the positions of Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel would not intermarry into those families. I will say it's so absolutely incredible. I will say, in today's day and age, it's fascinating. That's one of the things I think that we encounter is people have very little tolerance for others who don't agree with them. Right? It's almost as if we feel that when someone doesn't agree with me, it's an attack on my values. That often becomes because people who are confident enough in what they believe do not need others to agree with them. People who are insecure need everyone to agree with them. And if you don't agree with me, you're this, you're intolerant, you're this, that. Well, see, isn't it incredible? See, Beis Shammai, when you're secure, you can say, Beis Hillel, I know you don't agree with this. And that's okay. This is what I hold. I'm confident enough in my own shitos. I'm confident enough in my own hashkafas. I accept the fact that you don't agree with me. And again, I not only do I accept it, I could give kavod. I could honor your positions. I don't agree with you. But again, I could honor that. I'll say, isn't it absolutely beautiful? This is achdus. Achdus is not that we all agree. You have your opinions, I have my opinions. You have your lines, I have my lines. I respect your lines, you respect my lines. And ultimately, again, I'm deferential to you, you're deferential to me, without crossing the lines. And we recognize that there is so much more that we agree on than what we disagree on. This is the formula for Achdus. I will say, this is the formula for Mashiach. This is it. This is it. I will say, by the way, I think it'll teach you something else. So we have to go on. It's interesting. The Gemara says when Mashiach comes, we're going to follow Beis Shammai. So I'll say, I'll tell you something very interesting here. If you notice, who is the one who's going out of his way to go ahead and tell the other, you know what, maybe don't marry these or don't use these utensils? It's Shammai. See, I will say, which was something very fascinating, which tells you what? Which tells you that halacha l'maisa, in this context, who was the greater Rodef Shalom? Who was the one who was running after Achdus? It was Beis Shammai. We'll say, isn't that incredible? Beis Shammai was the one who told Hillel, you're great. These families, you're not going to be happy with. These Kalim, you're not going to be happy with. Maybe that's the pshat. When Mashiach comes, we're going to follow Beis Shammai. We'll say, maybe it's not just a din in halacha, but it's a din in hashkaf also. How do you bring Mashiach? It's funny. The way to bring Mashiach is to follow Beis Shammai. Not in halacha, but in hashkafa. We'll say, be a rodef shalom. Accept the fact that other people have different opinions, and be accepting of those opinions. Remember again, acceptance without agreement. I accept, but I don't agree. But lamaisa, be respectful of other people's opinions, and allow them the right to have those opinions, even if you vehemently disagree with them. And if you give them the kavod, give them the space and deferential acceptance without agreement. The halacha follows Beis Shammai in this area, and that is the key to bringing Mashiach. It's so simple. Yevamos Daf Yudal. I told you it was a good daf. Yevamos Daf Yudal, the key to bringing Mashiach. It's so simple, and yet thousands of years we can't seem to master it. But maybe we didn't have the sugya clear enough. Right now we have the sugya clearly enough. Now that we have it clear, Miras Hashem we should be zocher to implement. Kufa, Amr Belazar, Aval Bishnechlu, Beishan Beisel Betzaros, Modim Shem Amzer Mishay Surah, Elam Mishay Surah is Ervanish Kares. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Belazar says, even though Beishan Beisel argue by Tzaras, right? By Tzaras Erva, Tzaras Erva subject to Yibum, not subject to Yibum. Everyone agrees that Mamzer only comes from someone, from a union that is an Isser Erva and punishable by Kares. Man Modim. We'll say who's agreeing. So Ilim Beis Shammai Beis Hillel Pshita. So we'll say if it's Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, it's obvious. Because remember again, Beis Shammai say according to Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai holds that when Beis Hillel allows the Tzaras Erva to marry someone outside of the family, they're in violation of a law. Rather, we'll say Masi Beis Shel Beis Shammai. So he gufa chayvi krisosi. We'll say it's not true because remember, according to Beis Hillel, when Beis Shammai allows a Tzaras Erva to do Yibum, Beis Hillel holds that what? that is an Isser Eshesach, an Isser Erva, an Isser Kares, Mamzerus. To which the Gemara says, the Olam Beishama the Beis Hillel. We'll say ultimately again, it's really talking about Beisham the Beis Hillel. Afukim Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Yish Mamzer Mechai Be'lavin Kamash Malan De'in Mamzer Mechai Be'lavin. We'll say the Gemara is coming to go ahead and discount the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. What does Rabbi Akiva hold? Rabbi Akiva holds that halacha l'maisa, that you could have a situation of mamzerus from a lav. Rabbi Akiva is a very, very stringent position. Rabbi Akiva says that any marital union punishable by a lav, or any relationship punishable by a lav, creates mamzerus. Kamash malon, that we reject that. So Rabbi, I want to point out, see, it's interesting. According to Beis Shammai, right, Beis Shammai holds that Beis Hillel, you are causing people to violate prohibitions. Because you're taking a woman, remember again, that's Leah in our case, who's a tzaras erva, you're allowing her to marry someone outside of the family, that's a lav. What's the ramification of engaging in a marital union punishable by a lav? Nothing. Right? It's a lav. According to Rabbi Akiva, it creates mamzerus. But I will say we don't pass like Rabbi Akiva. The problem, of course, is from Beis Hillel to Beis Shammai. Because according to Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, you're taking a tzaras erva, telling her to do yibum. That's an isser kares. That's pretty serious. Tashma. So we'll say the Gemara is going to now go through a list of areas where Beis Shammai Beis Hillel disagree. We're not going to get into these cases. We're just going to read them. But Saros, that's our case. Achayos, case of sisters. Get Yashan, we'll say that's a case ultimately again of where a man gives a get and then is secluded with his wife. Safek ish as ish. Megarish as ishto v'lonimo. Pundak, a man who divorces his wife and then they sleep in the same place. Bekesef, b'shaveh kesef. Pruta, b'shaveh pruta. How much money you need to affect Kiddushin? We'll say, like I said, we're not going to get into these cases. Lo nimnu Beishamai milisa b'nashem Beis Hillel, v'lo Beis Hillel mi Beis Shammai. So we'll say, ultimately, again, despite the fact that they have all of these machloksim, and I will say, by the way, you'll think to yourself, is this the full extent of machlokas Beis Beis Hillel? No. We'll say, what's the common denominator on all of these lists, in these cases? They all affect what? Marriage. See what I'm saying? The stakes are much higher in cases of marriage. Because remember, if you get marriage wrong, then what happens? Well, if you get marriage wrong, many things happen. But Lamaisa, if you get marriage wrong from a halachic perspective, what's the problem? Mamzerus. See, I will say, despite the fact that Beis Shammai Beis Hillel have a number of different machloksim in marriage cases, nevertheless, lo nimnu Beis Shammai lisa b'nashem Beis Hillel, v'lo Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. We'll say they intermarried. L'lamdecha shechiba b'reyos nogim zevazeh. Rabbi say this is so beautiful to teach us, like we just said before, that ultimately, again, Rabbi say chiba, love, reyos, camaraderie, they exhibited towards one another. Shnei Amar, the Kaima Shnei Amar, top hold the pasuk that says ha'emes va'ashalom ahevu. We'll say ultimately again, emes, truth, and shalom, peace, become beloved. We'll say absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Shimon Omer, nimnu heim min avadai, v'lo nimnu min asafek. Now we'll say, let's be clear. Now remember again, we've already pointed out, the problem is not really Beis Shammai marrying into Beis Hillel, the problem is Beis Hillel marrying into Beis Shammai. When we say that ultimately again, they didn't refrain, they refrained from Vadai cases. That we saw already, right? So again, Beis Shammai would tell Beis Hillel, don't marry these women, right? You're not going to be happy with this situation. But from a Safek case, if it was a Safek, apparently they wouldn't intermarry. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. I amrit b'shlama asu mishum hachin nimnu, ele I amrit lo asu amay nimnu. But also, I'll say, so all this makes sense, assuming that what? That Beis Shammai actually practiced what they preached. But if Beis Shammai did not execute their halachic rulings, then why would Beis Hillel have to refrain at all? But Tizbaru, nihi da'asu, nihi nami da'asu, bishlama Beis Hillel, ninu Beis Shammai, dechai b'krisos, ninu mamzerim heim. But say furthermore, even if you say that Beis Shammai actually executed on their positions, I understand why Beis Hillel is not marrying into Beis Shammai. Because there's a chiv kares in certain situations. Ninu mamzerim heim. But ultimately, why would Beis Shammai ever refrain from marrying into Beis Hillel? Ultimately, again, I will say, why? Again, according to Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel's position at most is a lie. I will say it's finished with this. It's actually quite incredible. It turns out that the only thing everyone's really, really concerned about is the tzara herself. See, Rabbosai, the discussion at play over here is only actually regarding Leah. When we say nimnu lo nimnu, it's a reference to what would they marry Leah? Would they marry Leah? The tzara. So look at Rashi. The tzara atzma hadik tani nimnoim mitzara atzma uli olam beishamai nam nimnoim beisel milisa tzara sabas below chalitza. Ultimately, it will say halacha lamaisa. Ultimately, both beishamai and beisilal would not marry Leah in this situation. Everybody would agree that this woman herself is subject to too much halachic controversy, again, regarding each other. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, should she become available for marriage, Beis Shammai would not marry her from Beis Hillel's perspective, Beis Hillel would not marry her from Beis Shammai's perspective. Rabbi say, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up, I think we covered good ground today, Baruch Hashem. Rabbi say, we'll pick up with this last piece, as I didn't do it justice. We'll pick up, so what the real Nekudas HaMachlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel is actually not generations later, but it's the Tzara herself. Emir Hashem to be continued. Rabbi say, Shkoyach.